It's time for the unofficial 40. Soonerscoop.com's very official recruiting podcast featuring Soonerscoop.com recruiting publisher Josh McCuistion. Get your recruiting fix from the leader in Sooner recruiting. It's the unofficial 40 with your hosts, Soonerscoop.com publishers Gary Murdoch and Josh McCuistion.
All right, welcome back, everybody. It is time for another edition of the podcast that is taking the world by storm, literally. Like we're noticing our iTunes ranking climbing up in the top 50 in the college and high school category. So we can't tell you guys how much we appreciate you being a part of the podcast and listening. We welcome in now Josh McCuistion, who's actually making his way up to Oklahoma City for a big tilt tonight between Midwest City and Muskogee. Eddie Radosevich is here in studio, along with, we welcome back Joe Duvall, who's been gone for the last couple of weeks. So, guys, great to be back with you. And like I said, the podcast just going bonkers. So appreciate all you guys' hard work here.
Yeah, I'm as surprised as you guys are that people seem to be listening to this. So, hey, thank you guys for tuning into this nonsense.
I'm not surprised at all. This is exactly how I figured it would go.
Joe doesn't believe in us at all.
We're going top 5, maybe top number 1 by the end of the season, and the haters can suck.
Josh is driving with the baby, I believe. Are we going to get? Are we going to get any Laney time?
There's a good chance for some Laney talking. She will definitely be asking Tiffany for something in the very near future. She is currently engulfed in, I believe, Zootopia. But, once...
Great flick.
Yeah,
Great
it really
flick.
is. Yeah, I can tell you...
Joe, you don't have any kids?
Oh, I don't need to. I'm a Disney fan, man. I'll watch all those cartoons. Zootopia is great. Laney has great choices.
No shame in that.
You both are really weird.
Oh, come on.
Did not catch that.
By the way, I do have to bust Josh's chop. Now, look, I don't. When we get started here, at the very beginning, because Josh, I don't restrict any of you guys from like going on other people's podcasts. Even if we become the biggest podcast in the world, you guys are still going to be able to be guests on other people's podcasts. So I begrudge you not. But Josh, I noticed you did a podcast recently with our Ole Miss guys.
I did indeed.
And I just happened to be listening to it a little bit. And I noticed something. I'm gonna bring this to the kangaroo court to see exactly if they noticed what was off about Josh's interview with the. I think they call it the Oxford Exxon podcast. Is what the guys over at the what's our Ole Miss site's name?
Rebel Grove.
Rebelgrove.com. So here's Josh appearing as part of a guest on the Rebel Grove podcast.
When my brother lived in Oklahoma City, we would go to Norman, and every time I went to Norman, I was like, this is Athens West. And maybe that's what it was. But you were saying before we started, this is the first time for you in a while that it's kind of felt real. Why?
Well, I think because the two major parties, which, I think we all accept are the Big 12 decision makers, Texas and Oklahoma, seem to be on board.
Anybody else notice anything there that's curious?
Play it again. One more time.
You want to hear it one more time?
When my brother lived in Oklahoma City, we would go to Norman, and every time I went to Norman, I was like, this is Athens West. And maybe that's what it was. But you were saying before we started, this is the first time for you in a while that it's kind of felt real. Why?
Well, I think because the two major parties, which, I think we all accept are the Big 12 decision makers, Texas and Oklahoma, seem to be on board.
Anyone? Josh, you yell talk. What is up with that? Why is it when you're a guest on somebody's show, I've noticed this before, you're a yell talker?
How dare you? I have a voice-related medical condition. I suffer from voice immodulation. I'm unable to control the pitch or volume of my voice. Also known as Van Orton syndrome. VI is a recognized psychomedical condition that you may have read about in Newsweek or Cracked magazine.
So here's one more example of Josh yell talking.
What is interesting about it is that the two seem, and it's all reading tea leaves, because obviously Oklahoma and Texas are very keen to each other's need, their need for one another, that I think they're very careful about saying too much. But at the same time, you get the impression that their individual interests are at odds with one another on a lot of this.
You're really yelling, Josh.
Sometimes you just have to be heard.
He's a very powerful talker, just impactful.
And now you've got me scared, because it's the exact same scenario. I'm on the phone in my car, and that was what was happening in that interview.
See, that's kind of what I thought.
Scared to death no one would hear me.
Because when we have you in your studio with your nice microphone, you don't yell talk. But it's like when you're on the phone, you're just one of these people that thinks you have to scream into your phone or something, or you just have voice modulation.
I'll tell you what's not fair. Imagine being at a high school dance, singing along with everyone else, and a little bit softer now, and a little bit softer now, and a little bit softer now.
It's a tough situation to be in, because I know exactly what Josh means. When you do a radio interview on the phone, especially in your car,
you can't really hear them all that well.
You can't hear them, and the last thing you want those people to say is, repeat yourself after you go on a long spiel, because they couldn't hear you.
So Eddie is coming to Josh's defense.
I'm coming to Josh's defense, because I've been blamed to be a loud phone talker as well.
Suck on it, Trebek. Eddie's speaking for me because he knows I'm prone to the long spiel anyway. So
we busted
anything
you on
I
that.
say to be repeated, that's like 4 minutes of repetition.
Isn't there a Seinfeld episode about this? The loud talker or something?
There was a close talker.
Close talker, maybe that's it. Maybe Josh just needs to just go back further from the phone and still use the same yelling motion. Just have the phone out further as he's driving.
Like, there's no way I could ever do a interview or talk on the phone with the Apple headbuds and have to use like the
microphone
thing that's just on the I don't even know what you call that.
I always worry I get out of breath because I start pacing. If I'm on the phone talking, especially in my house, I start walking around the house.
When I was young, that would be a problem. Like, you don't breathe normally.
Right.
You're kind of nervous. And then you're out of breath, and you're like, oh my God, I'm just such a fat slob.
Yep.
Just have to sit down sometimes.
What are you doing? Jumping rope in the attic?
So, yeah, I just wanted to bust you on that. I noticed that while I was preparing the podcast last night. So, there you go. Josh Yell Talker. He's a great interview, though. Josh, you did do something cool last night. You went out to see a couple of Sooner Squad 17 members in Chris Robinson and Tyrese Robinson. Tell us what you saw last night.
Well, first of all, that was the funnest thing ever to try and post on the board, to keep making sure I did or didn't have the in that I needed to separate those two as we updated the board on what was going on. But, yeah, I mean, I've seen Chris Robinson now probably 6 or 7 times, and this is the second game I've seen him in. And it reminded me of when we saw him last spring at the Under Armour event in Cedar Hill. And he looked amazing for the first half. That's as well as I've seen him throw the ball. I really thought he was just solid from beginning to end. And the problem being, he takes a hit late in the first half, and I talked to Chris kind of mid-third quarter about what was going on, and it sounded like it was precautionary. He might have, a slight separation of his right shoulder. He wasn't walking around with ice on it in the second half. I don't burn, so it's not something where OU fans have to worry about, damaged goods or anything like that. But he played great. I thought Chris Robinson was as good as he could have been, and really, in my eyes, cemented that Rivals 100 status he has right now. With Tyrese Robinson, I see a guy that has a world of talent, still working on some things as an offensive lineman. I thought at times he kind of played too high, wouldn't run his feet like he needed to. But, I mean, you're talking about a guy that's 6'5", 300 pounds, and I bet you every fourth play he was pulling from his right tackle position. Well, I say right tackle. They moved him around a little bit back and forth. But he's a guy that has all the athletic ability in the world. It's just a matter of him kind of putting together the technical pieces. And what did surprise me a little bit is comparing him to seeing Marquise Hayes, who we both, we all had a chance to see both in St. Louis and then again at the 5-Star Challenge in Atlanta. I think Hayes might be a little farther ahead of him technically right now, which is not something I would have anticipated saying.
Interesting. I mean, Hayes is a guy who just kind of came onto the scene, I don't know, within these last few months, has really blown up, and feels like Robinson's kind of more of been the known commodity. But you're saying right now you think you would take Hayes as the guy who's more ready to come in and be technically sound as a college football guard? Is that what you're saying, Josh?
I think that's what I would say, and I think part of that also goes into Hayes is a guy that is already so strong. Tyrese is a guy that's got all the, like I said, he's going to bulk up in the weight room and he'll get stronger and things. But Marquise can win right now with his hands, and Robinson isn't there yet. Like if he's not, and he played Mesquite Horn last night, a very good program, going to have guys that are in the weight room. You hear your first Laney little piece there, I'm sure. So, but yeah, so I like where Hayes is at. But at the same time, I think Robinson's a better athlete. I think in time he'll probably be the better player. But it's kind of like when we talked about Drew Samia last year, a guy that just kind of understood it a little better and maybe is a little farther ahead technically in understanding some of the finer points of the game.
Is Laney upset or is she just happy?
She was celebrating. That was the end of a big Shakira song in the middle of Zootopia.
Oh, yeah.
And she had sung with most of it, and so she was celebrating her accomplishment.
She's not hungry or anything.
It's a simple question. Would you eat the moon if it were made of ribs?
That sound would have gone on for... Now you hear unhappiness. So...
Oh, no.
That, hopefully it doesn't go bad. Carrie, you may have called down the thunder there. I'm not sure.
All right, let's talk about tonight's schedule. This will be coming out. Some of you guys will be listening to this over the weekend. And this will be a nice preview of what you can find on the website over the weekend. But tonight's schedule, let's start with Josh and Joe, or Eddie and Joe. Tell us a little bit about what you're going to see tonight.
Going out to see Jones play Oklahoma Christian.
Correct, yeah.
High school in Edmond, and obviously the main attraction for us going out there is 2018 wide receiver Sean Shaw. I've seen him actually, I guess I saw him last year at one point, and he had a couple touchdown grabs in the game, and Jones rolled. I forget who they were even playing that night, but going out to see him tonight, and obviously he should be primed to have a really good junior season, and probably one of the top players in the state in that 2018 class. We all know how special that is. Also going to see Dalton Mays, a kind of a hybrid guy that I saw and I really liked. I told Josh about last year, and it's going to be kind of interesting to see just how much he's progressed here in the last year. And then Brandon George is Jones' quarterback, obviously, and I don't know if he's going to be a big-time guy, but he's definitely somebody that can go play somewhere. And they'll probably score quite a bit of points
for
tonight.
people that forgot, he's the guy that won the Rivals Quarterback Challenge down in Dallas.
Yeah, the day after. I completely forgot about that.
George is one of the more underrated guys in the state. I really like the way he throws the ball. He's also a dual threat guy. He ran for 1,000 yards last year. He's got offers from places like Hawaii and things like that. Maybe that's not too far off considering his size, but he's somebody that's going to go on to the next level and be really productive. And it does also help, like Getty mentioned, when you throw to a guy that's 6'5", 200 pounds, and Sean Shaw, who will be a likely candidate for an Oklahoma offer in that 2018 class. He's the 119th player in the country, I think we have in 2018.
We saw Shaw out at OU's camp, working out, and I thought I liked his demeanor a lot better. He competed a lot harder than I remember him competing down in Dallas at the Rivals Challenge. And he was a guy that really kind of, to me, he's kind of like Josh Proctor. Like when they feel comfortable in their own element, they're going against Oklahoma guys. They're not unsure of themselves. You really see what they can deliver. And I think, we're going to see that probably from Shaw tonight. Maybe a confidence level that he hasn't had going into his senior season.
Well, when I met Josh out at Noble High School during the spring tour, we were able to see him, a little bit of him, and I think, Josh, I was out there for 20 minutes, and we probably had film of 3 touchdown receptions from Shaw. There isn't a guy that's going to be he will be the best probably wide receiver in the state this year, I would say.
That's just like going his junior year, didn't he?
Yeah, and he's just going into his junior year. So he's a very interesting guy, and certainly a guy that I think Oklahoma fans will want to keep an eye on here over the next 2 years.
Josh, we got you? We lose you?
Yeah. Oh, I'm sorry. No. I with
it's not
all the recruiting talk, I feel like
just
I have
say yes
to wait
and
out.
we'll move on.
No, but
okay.
Shaw,
Well,
I think
If you want just your thoughts on Shaw and what you've seen of him the last year and a half.
Yeah, Eddie touched on when he got out to Noble. I literally walked up to the field and I was like, okay, let me get a little Instagram video here, do something. And I just put it on Shaw thinking, we'll get something of him blocking or running a route, and then we'll send that out so everybody can kind of see we're here. Kid literally makes a play in front of me, just this beautiful jumping grab. It was probably the best Instagram thing I've done. And that's kind of what he is. I mean, when you talk about a guy at that level, going against the competition he faces daily, and to have a quarterback like Brandon George that can deliver, I mean, he's a guy that if he went for 1,500 yards this year, it wouldn't shock me at all. I mean, he's going to have an absolutely huge year. And along with guys like C.J. Moore and Adrian Wilson at Union, I mean, it's a unbelievable group of receivers in that 2018 class, and I think they're all in that conversation to pick up an Oklahoma offer.
Now, Josh, I've got some bad news for you. I'm toughing it out right now, but the sickness is coming for me. So you're going to be at Midwest City, Muskogee by yourself. I hate to tell you.
Okay.
My voice is beautifully deeper though today.
It is kind of silky smooth. It's very nice.
But tell us a little bit about what you're hoping to see tonight at Midwest City.
Yeah, there is obviously, I think the name that people are most familiar with is Evan Fields, the 2017 safety that's got, Arizona State, Kansas State, a lot of the usual suspects in Oklahoma. But the guy that I'm clearly going to see that I'm really excited about is Jalen Redmond, the defensive end outside linebacker for Midwest City. Actually has missed some practice this week from what I was told. Had passing in his family, had to return home to Mississippi where most of his family is from. But he will play tonight. They're going to use him in some different packages. He'll stand up sometimes. And I think that's what's so intriguing about him, because he's a guy that, especially from an Oklahoma perspective, he could stand up and play that 3-4 outside linebacker, or he's got the kind of frame where he could grow to 260, 270 and put his hand in the ground. So I really expect him to probably be Oklahoma's next in-state offer. I expect probably Mike Stoops to be at the game next week when Booker T. Washington comes to Midwest City, and I think Joe will actually be there at that one next week. You're going to see Jalen Redmond, Daxton Hill, but we can do that next week. But, along with him, Cameron Curl from Muskogee, a Texas Tech commitment, 3-star safety. I've not had a chance to see him in person. I'm very interested to see what he looks like. He's a guy that I think could really climb up our rankings as the year goes on. But, yeah, I mean, it's Muskogee and Midwest City. There's going to be a bunch of athletes, and I'll almost guarantee in Muskogee's case they'll have some guy that's very interesting that nobody really knows about yet.
I'm a little jealous of you that you're getting to go out and see Redmond already, although, as you mentioned, I'm going to go see him next week. I had a coach who coaches for someone other than Midwest City send me a message a few days ago saying that he went out to see Redmond and that he's just an absolute freak of nature. So I think he's someone that will absolutely blow up this year. I think in a 3-4 outside linebacker setting in Oklahoma scheme, he could really wreak some havoc. It would not shock me at all if you're right and he's the next offer in 2018. That kid has a lot of potential.
Well, I apologize, Josh, for calling in sick on you already tonight.
Carrie Murdoch.
Let me tell you why I suck.
So there you go. Even the drop man gets me every once in a while. But the good news is Houston next week's going to be huge. Eddie and I are going to go out on Thursday. So we're going to hopefully did you say that Marvin Wilson is going to be playing Thursday night?
That's
next
Friday
week?
night,
or is he playing Friday
Marvin
night?
plays Friday, yeah. I will, and it's really up to when you guys get into Houston, but next Thursday I'll be catching Caleb Shoshone and North Shore, who just put a beat down last night in their season opener against Manville, who's a school that, I don't think needs a lot of introduction. They put out guys that OU offers almost every year, including Jalen Preston, who's mentioned OU as one of his top few schools and is one of the, probably top 5-10 athletes in the 2018 class. So, I mean, there's going to be probably, I would guess, anywhere from 15 to 20 legitimate Division I prospects on that field next Thursday night. And then Friday, you get to turn around and watch Marvin Wilson, Walker Little go against a very good Plano Prestonwood program.
Well, that's going to be really good. And I know we've talked about a lot of different things, but Josh is, we talked about this last week. Josh is going to be going to the game. Eddie and I will be covering the game, so we won't be out in the parking lot drinking beer like Josh, unfortunately. I don't know. I guess we could if we wanted to.
I might be out there.
We'll put a poll up on the board
9:30.
or something.
9:30 in the morning.
Do scoopers object to?
I feel like all Eddie needs is a yellow light. It doesn't have to be a green light. It just needs to be like not red, and he would be in the parking lot with a beer.
It'll be a special weekend.
Driving down, we're just going to listen to Glenn Campbell the entire way. Well, I guess we're not.
Every time I've gone down to Houston, though, I think
some beautiful music right there.
Pick some stuff up at Buc-ee's for you.
Does this count for Old Man Carey? What is this?
This is classic country boys.
You're dating yourself here a little bit on this one.
This is classic country boys.
I know Rhinestone Cowboy. I didn't know he had anything else.
You're gonna die.
A lot in the chamber.
There's also, you got some Larry Gatlin and the Gatlin Brothers. Some good stuff right here.
This is when I'll put my headphones on.
Houston needs it. I'm one day closer to you. See, all the old people out there. Shut up, Josh. You're fired, too.
Our iTunes
bad.
rating is plummeting as people are listening to this. Like, they're asking if they can unsubscribe as this happens.
Whatever.
I don't even
I'm
know.
glad I'm not going to help you tonight.
One copy.
Glad I'm not going to help you tonight.
It's bad.
Okay, as Joe pointed out, he wanted to talk about moving on because Josh can't stay with us for long because he's got a baby with him. By the way, I saw she can do her ABCs now, like all the way through.
Yeah. She's doing the days of the week. I was talking to Tiffany about it earlier today. I mean, and you don't want to get too dad on the podcast, but it's like in the last 2 months or so, her brain has just gone crazy. Like it's becoming a parrot, and with some of my language issues that we discussed in last week's podcast, I'm having to be real careful about the things I do and don't say.
You got to.
You have got to video that and put it up on Facebook.
It's time to get a cell phone. Get her a cell phone.
Mm-hmm.
Oh,
Snapchat?
God.
Well, it's only normal that she looks like you, so she's going to be more like Tiffany, like smart.
No, you're dead on. She is. I think her vocabulary is already beyond mine, so that's the good news.
Joe brought this up. Some news coming in. Ohio State weekend starting to look like that super. I mean, we knew it was going to be bonkers from the beginning. But guys, and Joe, if you want to start off with it, but some news coming out about Ohio State visitors this week, and Josh, you can recap after that.
Yeah, I mean, just off the top of my head, you got big names like Jeffrey Okudah, 5-star safeties coming in. Ohio State seen as maybe the favorite in that recruitment with Oklahoma right behind him. So that's going to be a huge weekend for him. One that caught my eye was Kobe Boyce, who's committed to Texas still. He didn't come up for the barbecue.
He's going to come to the barbecue.
He didn't make it, but he kind of keeps flirting with OU. He'll tweet out all these Texas things, but then he'll keep flirting with OU. And I've said it for a while. When there's smoke, there's fire and things like that.
Well, that's totally, to me, that's a deal of things could go south. Texas could lose. They could fire Charlie Strong. He's probably smart just to keep his other options open, which obviously Oklahoma is one of his plan Bs right now. But you know what? You're a lot of plan Bs right now. You might as well. I mean, people aren't above saying, "Yeah, we'll keep recruiting you."
Yeah.
I like the comparison to recruiting a lot like dating. So if you're committed to a girl, if you're dating a girl, and then all of a sudden you check on Instagram or Twitter or whatever, and she's hanging out at other guys' parties, visiting other guys' places, you're not going to love that. I mean, that's not going to be a great sign for your relationship, no matter how much you want to spin it. So that one caught my eye. Even if it's just he's enamored with Sooner Squad 17, enamored with being a part of it, just to get a taste of it. That's still helpful to OU. And then also throw in on the basketball front, 5-star Trey Young from Norman North has said that he will visit OU for his official visit on that weekend, a big football weekend. He's deciding to come in. So that'll be big on multiple fronts for OU. Josh, who else we got in there coming in that Ohio State weekend?
Well, I have to double back before I can start with that. Eddie, I want to know, for you, when you see the girl that you're kind of dating on Snapchat at some other guy's party, I don't feel like you're just not going to like that, Eddie. Do you burn her house down? Like, how far does it go for you, Eddie? Like,
I stalk her for 2 weeks, and then I stalk her for 2 weeks, send messages to her parents, and then I don't know. You gotta figure it out enough time to figure out what you're going to do with the body. So you gotta take measures to keep yourself out of trouble. Is pretty much what I'm saying.
Cover your tracks. Absolutely.
Maybe spend a semester down in Baylor.
Horrible things are going to happen!
Wow, that took a turn that even I hadn't anticipated. But you tease the monkeys at the zoo, and these are the things that happen.
They throw the poop at you.
Exactly.
Yep.
Rest in peace, Harambe.
Eddie brings fire every week. Didn't he tell people that coaches hate their kids a couple weeks ago?
Yeah, for autograph day.
100% true. I walked around at Meet the Sooners Day, and it was like nobody wanted to go see the coaches, and I'm hoping it was because everybody was scared.
Eddie just has fire inside him. You have to bring it out.
Kerry, I thought Eddie was pretty well behaved in Joe's 2 weeks of absence. Maybe this is Joe that brings it out.
I'm a bad influence?
He brings it out.
That could be true. We did have a fun late night visit in Atlanta.
Judging by Eddie's tweet, he came in here today just ready to just burn the place down. Yeah,
going for gas. Laughs are overrated.
I think Eddie's ultimate plan is to we feel like Eddie's pretty loyal. We're pretty loyal to Eddie, but I think Eddie's ultimate plan is to become a member of Barstool Sports, and that's what he's using this podcast to do.
I think Eddie would leave us in a heartbeat.
If Go Press Go hears this, maybe.
Yeah.
You whore.
All right, let's try and recover from Baylor, and I will get
Ohio
into the
State visitor weekend. Your thoughts, Josh?
Yeah, the thing that sticks out to me, and we kind of talked about it a little bit in the scoop this morning. It is interesting to me because I had talked to several of the commitments and guys from Robert Barnes and some of the others that had really mentioned, I think we're going to wait until late in the season, maybe even like into the banquet weekend or into January, and that's when we're all going to do our official visit. But they were all going to be there for the Ohio State game and kind of hang out through the weekend and be around guys like Kobe Boyce and Okuda. And, Marvin Wilson, I fully expect him to be an unofficial visitor for Ohio State. So, that is the plan that I had really had until, I guess it was about Wednesday when you started reading, Kenneth Murray, Robert Barnes, Jalen Rager, and Rambo were all going to be up there.
There's always a tingle.
It had become a change, and I guess that's what Oklahoma's going to – I think they're clearly putting all their chips in on Ohio State, and, it's a gamble because if that game doesn't go well, that can really taint, kind of how a weekend goes because you guys know, it's not – really fun to be in a college town after a huge loss. It doesn't usually go well.
Unless you're 21.
Yes.
Unless you're 21.
Well, yeah. Don't get me wrong, fun is there to be had, but it's definitely a little more somber. It feels like you're drinking more like an Irish wake than, like a celebratory thing.
Right.
The first time I ever got drunk was after Oklahoma lost to TCU in 2005, so there's something to be had. Yeah. Don't do the math there, parents, please.
You were still at Norman North, weren't you?
Jeez, oh man, he's a guy now.
That's a good one.
But yeah, so good Lord, we are so far off track. No, I think it just comes down to Oklahoma really deciding, we want this to be the marquee weekend that everybody expects it to be. They're going to bring the commits in. They're going to bring their high-ranked guys in and really try and close because, again, kind of to go back to the scoop, there's not many targets out there. I kind of did the math on it. There's about 20 guys that Oklahoma would probably take right this minute if they tried to commit, and they don't have spots for but maybe a third of those guys. So it's really interesting that as this thing kind of starts to come down the stretch, and you can see who those real final targets are.
What sucks for guys, too, is, you usually get, this is going to be one of the biggest games of the year. So you're going to get guys that haven't been interested in Oklahoma that want to call up and say, hey, any chance I can come in and see you guys for that game? And they're going to be like, no.
That will be interesting, though, to see how they go about that. There's a certain number. I think, Josh, we've talked about it last year even, there's a certain number where you get to have just too many visitors. You can't have that many guys on campus. And I know that in the past they have tried to limit it, haven't they? And what number do you think is the most number you can take for an official visit? Because you don't want a guy that's committed coming and staying with somebody that, I don't know. It seems like, I don't want to say a nobody, but I think there would be some guys, if you have too many guys in there, You have to pair him with somebody.
You want to devote all your attention to the big guys, the big guns. I mean, you don't want Okuda, having all this attention drawn by a bunch of guys that aren't really interested in OU that just want to go to the game.
I don't know that.
Well, and kind of to go with that point, there was a guy a few weeks ago, a guy named Jerez Parks out of Florida that I think he's a 5-star. He's right on that fringe. And he listed Oklahoma in like his top 8. Well, I talked to a few people, and what I got was he'd literally never spoken to Oklahoma. So you kind of are getting some of that now where these guys are just wanting to say Oklahoma or talk about Oklahoma, partially to get into that game, but partially to just say, hey, I'm talking to Oklahoma. Even though Oklahoma would be happy to talk to that kid. So it's just one of those kind of strange things that happens. But, yeah, I don't know that it's so much about total gross number like, 20 guys or 15 guys. But, if you want to use like an example, well, say it's at running back, and you can't bring in 3 running backs and really expect Jay Boulware to be able to have the time needed to give all of those guys the personal attention that they're going to expect. So it's more, like there was some talk that Marvin Wilson might come in for an official that weekend, but what I'm told it's going to be an unofficial. But if he had done that and then OU's also hosting Greg Rogers, well, they're clearly going to make Marvin the focus of attention. That's the way that's going to go. But how does Rogers handle that? Does he get turned off by Oklahoma because, they're picking a guy that probably has OU a little higher on his board than Rogers does right now, and a guy that's a little closer to home, all these things that make more sense and, frankly, is a better prospect. So it's just one of those things where it really is. That's one of the things that people don't think about enough when they say, oh, we wanted 20 official visitors. Man, that gets hard. That's a lot of man hours, and you can turn a kid off because he's not getting to spend the time with Calvin Thibodeau or Mike Stoops or Kerry Cooks or whoever his position coach is, because that coach is talking to 4 other kids and their parents and everything else, and there's just not enough hours in the day.
And the flip side of that is the guy I went out to see last week, Jacob Phillips, coming in for the Louisiana-Monroe game the week before. He'll be one of the only guys on campus, and you might say, man, I really wish Oklahoma had got him in there for the Ohio State game in that atmosphere, but he's going to be the focal point when he comes in week 2 against Louisiana-Monroe. The entire coaching staff.
They may shower him in rose petals.
Exactly.
He's going to be the bell.
They're going to try to lock that up before. Hines and he might be racing towards one scholarship, and Oklahoma might say, hey, we have an opportunity now to lock this kid up, and they'll have all hands on deck. So it is kind of interesting how they're going to be able to find that balance going forward.
As we always ask you, Josh, you've already given us enough time, more than we asked you for today. Anything else that you wanted to hit on in the world of recruiting before we get out of here? Because I also have one thing I want to ask you team-wise and really about OU Houston before you get out. But anything recruiting-wise?
No, nothing too particular. It's kind of, the scoop I thought really covered the base well because there's just so few guys left that, you really you can feel the turn to 2018. That's becoming more and more of the thing and more of where the focus is going to be. And I think you'll see it in our coverage over the next month, 2 months, 3 months. We're going to be in a lot of 2018 stuff. There's not enough. It's kind of like we were just talking about with the coaches not having enough time. There's not enough 2017 guys for us to go cover. There's just not. We could knock all that out in the first 5 weeks and then kind of be left with nothing much to do, which I don't think would break any of our hearts. But at the same time, we got to keep covering stuff. So there's going to be a lot of. Bray Walker, Josh Proctor. I'm trying to find a way to go see Cameron Rising this year. So I think people need to get more serious about familiarizing themselves because that class. It may not. 18 is upon us.
One thing,
Eddie.
One thing before I let you go, Josh. Tomorrow night or Saturday night, I need a prediction. Cedar Hill, Bishop Gorman. I've never been a bigger Cedar Hill fan in my entire life.
Because of Tate Martell?
Yes, I hope Cedar Hill wins by 1,500 points and he gets hurt. No, I'm just kidding about that.
Wow.
I don't hope he gets hurt, but I do hope Cedar Hill wins.
I am a strong man. Take a run at me.
I will be watching.
Eddie knew how wrong that was.
Yeah, that was
Eddie
wrong.
was like, okay, that's too far. But no, I'm with you. I want to say I've never met Tate Martell, but I hear nothing that I enjoy. Like, I hear nothing that makes me feel like I might be wrong on that kid. Like,
people who live halfway across the country hate him. Like,
yes.
It's so bizarre.
I think he is everything that he presents on Twitter. Good, whatever you want to say it. That he is the person that you think he is. I mean, so that's kind of how I see him. I lean probably maybe a little towards Gorman, and that's just because, and it's funny to say this after what I led in with, I think Tate Martell is a considerably better quarterback than Avery Davis. I'm not a big buyer in Avery Davis, the Notre Dame commitment that is Cedar Hill's quarterback. I think when you look out around, I like more pieces of Cedar Hill, but when you got two teams that are that close, I just think it's going to come down to a big play or a big, something at the end of the game, and I buy a little bit more into Martell being able to make that play than Avery Davis.
By the way, let's pour one out for one John Franklin III from Last Chance U. He did not win the starting job at Auburn. Who knew that a guy that got beat out by a white, short walk-on wouldn't make it at Auburn?
Needed to play some Sarah McLachlan for him.
That's just... look, obviously they had a spot they needed to fill, and they were just taking a flyer.
Yeah.
I haven't seen one thing that says John Franklin III could be of the 6 games I saw in Lance Chance U. Never once did I think to myself, boy, he's a sleeper. He's really going to make somebody a great quarterback if they just take a chance.
And intangible-wise, he must just not present anything as far as leadership, team, anything.
He called his own offensive coordinator a dumb F on camera.
That was awesome.
Yeah.
He was talking about himself, probably.
My thought watching Last Chance U was, how the hell did that guy ever end up at Florida State? Like, he wasn't better in high school. That wasn't like, oh, yeah, he really fell off once he got under Jimbo Fisher. Like, that doesn't work. So he was a worse player then, and they still took him. And he had a ton of offers. It's not just on Florida State. So, I never understood how that was supposed to be a fit. And I wonder how Auburn felt about watching that Last Chance U and how that kind of played out behind the scenes in that game and everything that worked out the way it did. And you talk about intangibles. The guy was talking about, like, how fortunate he was that his starter got hurt. Like, and there was never like, oh, you hate to have it happen that way. Like, he was just like, yeah, I got real lucky. He got knocked out of the game. Like, really? That's how you're going to do your teammates? So that dude, Franklin's got more issues than just throwing the ball.
The Crimson Corner would have burned down if he would have ended up at OU, and people were sitting there watching Last Chance U, and him just pretty much throwing up on himself for half of the series, and then all of a sudden he gets an offer at the end. God, that would have. The only thing that could have made that better is if Josh Heupel would have been the one that offered him at the very end.
I don't know. Everybody got fired up when they got Keith Nichol. He wasn't any good.
That's true. I could have told you that, though. When he walked into the Fiji house wearing Timberlands and a Bluetooth headset, God.
You knew it was over for Keith Nichol?
Yeah, it was 100% over.
By the way, I want to play this.
I haven't finished my 9-part series on Keith Nichol. There's still one more left to go from that. I think I wrote 9,000 words when that kid committed. That was unbelievable.
Hey, he got us a lot of subscriptions, that's all.
Did he?
I'm not going to rip on him too much, yeah.
He was so sad when he came. I lived in the athletic dorms when he came in, and he every day was just moping around. It's like he saw Sam Bradford at practice and was like, crap. What did I just do?
Why didn't they tell me about that guy?
Exactly.
One last thing I wanted to play as we transition to Houston and let Josh go. Eddie and I were talking to Dakota Austin this week. I don't know if you know what I'm talking about, but he said something really interesting, and I'm just going to play it for you. Then, Josh, I'm going to ask for some of your reaction. But here's Dakota Austin talking about Houston's quarterback, Greg Ward Jr.
See, the interesting thing about that, I played against him in high school. We played against him in high school in one of like the biggest games of the year that year, and he ran around in circles. He had our DNs going crazy, and one of our DNs at A&M, just playing spectacular. So we know what he can do. We game planning for it right now, and we'll have it under control by the time game comes.
And he also went on to say they won that game on the final play.
Mm-hmm.
But, Josh, I was curious what you remembered about Greg Ward Jr., if anything, when he was in high school.
Not a ton, because, that's been something that's been, I think Oklahoma, as their presence has gotten better in Houston, has kind of moved out of it a little bit. You don't see their presence there like it used to be. And, Ward being, if I'm not mistaken, the Tyler John Tyler guy.
Yes, that's right, yeah.
Yeah, was not really that much on the radar. But, I mean, he was one of those guys you heard about. And when Houston got him, there was definitely a lot of buzz, but nobody thought he was going to play quarterback. Everybody thought he'd just become a slot receiver like all these undersized kind of dual threat guys. And for a while that's the path he was on. But no, I mean, I don't remember a ton about him. But I mean, you ask people out there in East Texas, and they'll tell. I mean, they're all like, oh yeah, that guy. He's just doing the same stuff he did in high school. And from the way they talk about it, it feels so much like. Back in 2005 when you guys heard, there was the whole Vince Young thing before the Rose Bowl against USC where he's talking about, they just kind of let me start doing me. I just pretty much started going around making plays and stopped trying to coach me so much. That's kind of what it felt like. Now, Herman, I don't think there's any question. He's done a lot of work with that guy and he's helped him. But I think at some point he is so good when things break down. And that's what Austin's talking about there. Because, yeah, you can have great coverage, and then he evades an end. Well, you can't cover for 9 seconds. It's just not going to happen. So, that's when things start to break down, and that's when it gets scary for OU. I think they're going to be fine in those first 3 or 4, the natural progression of a play. But when it starts to break down, I mean, guys, this is not like, he's a good athlete at quarterback. This is a kid that could play wide receiver at a lot of places in college football. So, this is a guy, if it breaks down, he's capable of going 70 yards anytime.
And there are a few things here that might make that a little scary for Oklahoma, because if Kerry Cooks wants to play a lot of man, which he says he does, leave his guys on islands, they're turning their back and they're running with receivers. And then you also have new pass rushers in at linebacker. You got Obo, who notoriously has struggled to get lined up in his career at Oklahoma, and if he can't maintain the right passing lane, the right rush lanes, and they lose some integrity there, that's a recipe for some disaster for Oklahoma. So it's not unheard of for a quarterback like this to really derail an Oklahoma season. So I think people might be maybe not underestimating Houston, but I've heard people say, well, if OU loses to Houston, then they're really in trouble. It's possible. It's not this unheard of thing. It wouldn't be like BYU in 2009. This would be much less of an upset.
Well, Josh, I want to thank you for joining us. I feel like we've made some real progress. You became more human as we went along. You weren't yelling into the phone as much. I just wanted to congratulate you.
How dare you! I have a voice-related medical condition. I suffer from voice immodulation. I'm unable to control the pitch or volume of my voice.
So I think we've done some quality work here today, Josh.
Yeah, and I've learned what I like about this podcast. I think we all learn something about ourselves a little bit. And apparently I scream into the phone, so now we're going to work on that. We're going to go back to the drawing board, let the coaches continue to work in the off season, and next podcast try and come out and be a better player as the season begins.
You sound like a real boy now. You really do. I don't think we need to do any more work.
Keep grinding, and silence the haters.
One day at a time.
It's like group therapy.
All right, Josh, we'll let you get going. Look forward to your work tonight on the boards and throughout the weekend as you cover some high school football and everybody covering, except for me because I'm a bastard. So
yeah, I think so. I'll be there carrying the torch for you.
All right, Josh, thanks a lot, man.
Enjoyed it, guys.
We'll catch you soon.
We've covered a lot of ground, shared a few laughs. Thanks for coming on.
So there you go. Eddie, if you want to hang Josh up there. It's manual stuff on the podcast all of a sudden. All right, so wanted to cover a little bit of the team stuff moving ahead. Obviously, we talked to Bob Stoops, what was it, 2 days ago now, Wednesday?
Yep.
He'll have his press conference on Monday. He said he didn't want to really give out a whole lot on starters and positions, especially on the offensive line. He did kind of confirm one thing, which was Curtis Bolton has a patellar tendon issue, and he'll miss the first game. I'm sure the jokes are there that he's done for the season because Bob said he actually admitted that he'd miss a game. So That's not good for special teams. I don't know that it really hurts you defensively, but he was going to be, Tim Kish had told us earlier, he was going to be a really big part of special teams along with Arthur McGinnis. But Tay Evans is back healthy, so there's really nothing to worry about there. But the other thing was that we talked to Calvin Thibodeau on Tuesday just about something that we've kind of been in the dark about, and that was the status of Matt Romar. How much have you been able to get out of Matt Romar in practice?
You know, Matt had something. You know, I think it was day 2 he went down. I mean, those 2 days he looked pretty dang good. But then, you know, he had a small, you know, he's kind of in a concussion protocol. But we should have him back for game week.
And that's the, you know, you hear concussion protocol and you're just kind of like, ew, that's not good.
Concussion protocol for the last 3 weeks, pretty much.
Yeah, that is. I mean,
it's very odd.
You know, it was interesting because I was listening. I was kind of cutting up some stuff, and you know, Bob had said earlier in the day, like somebody decided to ask a concussion question at the start of his press conference interview.
Great way to start
the other day
interview session.
And he did say something I thought was interesting, though. He said sometimes you want to hold them out longer to make sure they're okay, because if you rush them back too soon, the chance of getting another concussion is greater. Mm-hmm. So that does kind of make sense. It's like I'm not as worried that Matt Romar, there's really something wrong with him. They're just trying to be careful because he's their oldest, most experienced defensive lineman really in the program.
I think it'd also be a lot bigger deal too. Is I assume that he can stay up to date with conditioning wise. It's not a foot injury that he can't stay off.
That he's out there in a yellow jersey and he goes through all the drills and everything. So.
Yeah, but the thing you worry about, I guess, is with a head injury is, and, I mean, Bob Stoops has been one to undersell injuries before. What's the lingering effects? I mean, if he goes out there in Houston and he's going to be a nose tackle on the line of scrimmage every single play, and they're going to be banging heads, and how closely are they going to watch him? How quickly does he get pulled out of the game, especially with the depth they have there with Jordan Wade and Marquise Overton just waiting in the wings with plenty of playing time. So, I mean, I would at least be a little concerned if Matt Romar continues to have these concussion protocol symptoms and things like that. So, I mean, especially as a nose tackle where you're going to be banging heads every single play.
Well, and speaking of last chance, Jamal Danley, Stoops, confirmed that basically he gave up football because he was having multiple concussion issues, and that's something that Bill Bedenbaugh told us about way back even before they started practicing at Bob's golf thing, so that was a real possibility. So that turns out to be the case with him. Now, the other thing that happened this week in terms of nailing down some information is Mike Stoops. He made me work for it, but I got him to admit that Dakota Austin would indeed be their starting corner opposite Jordan Thomas. Are you settled at a starter opposite Jordan at this point at corner?
Yeah, I think so.
Do you want to say who that is?
No, I mean, what would you want? I mean, we're going to throw 11 guys out there. It's an obvious question,
isn't it?
Dakota's played well for us. All last year when he was in there. So we look for him to go out there and play well for us.
I felt really good about that. He didn't want to admit, but I think just because it was me, he knew he had to.
He sometimes you get Mike in a good mood. Mike's been in a good mood, I think, for the most part at every session throughout the preseason. And that was a good grab by you, Kerry, because I don't think he was willing to give it up, but he ended up doing it.
Go ahead, Joe.
I was just going to say, I think you also caught him in a moment where he realized he had no reason not to give it up. I mean, is Houston going to go, oh, now we got that Dakota Austin tape we can check out? I mean, he said he knew who he wanted to put out there, and go ahead and give Dakota some recognition. I thought that was a great job by you pushing, because why not? Why not tell us who that guy is?
I think Micaiah Quick definitely made a run throughout camp, but I think it just became obvious, through all the practices, just little things here and there. Dakota Austin, essentially started 3 games last year. He came in after the first play when Zach Sanchez twisted his ankle against Texas Tech, but they can rely on him. I mean, going to Houston on the road, neutral environment, a team that could be really good, that's the right choice to me, is to play Dakota Austin.
Dakota Austin would have no problem. I'd have no problem taking him with me into a back alley. I like the way his mentality. I like the way he talks. He would have no problem cutting somebody up, I feel like, if you really needed it.
Here's Kerry Cooks talking about some of that aspect of his personality. How much does his personality help him? I mean, you got a backfield there that has so many starters returning. To have a guy fit in that plays so hard, that seems like that's got to be the best possible scenario.
Well, the one thing about Dakota is that he's a scrappy player. You know, he's going to fight, and he's always been a great competitor. And I think his attitude makes him a little bit of who he is. You know, he's not in a negative way, but at that position, you got to have a guy that just doesn't care, that's able to be out there and walk on that island. You know, you're going to give up some things, but you got to be able to reset that mind and come back. And Dakota is every aspect of that mentality that you need at corner.
Reading between the lines on that is Kerry Cook saying that Dakota Austin gives 0 Fs. Anything.
He's a dog.
And I mean, when you look at who he replaced, I mean, Zach Sanchez was a great corner at OU, but if he had any criticisms, it was his tenacity when tackling. And Dakota Austin came in undersized, even compared to Zach Sanchez, and did a better job of it.
He was second on the teams, if I remember this correctly. I think he was second on the teams in tackles in that Texas Tech game. I think he was third in tackles the other 2 games that he played. Yeah, so he's not afraid to go in and put his head down and tackle somebody.
The other interesting, I guess, part of that conversation that we had with Kerry Cooks is the development of Parrish Cobb once they got him onto the field. Yeah. If he would have been able to practice in the first 2 weeks, I wonder if that would have made that bigger of a difference.
Yeah.
Cook said that, I mean, I think one of the reasons why Dakota Austin's so obvious is because Cook said the people that were pushing him were the young guys, were the freshmen. He said Parrish Cobb and Parnell Motley were really making a run at it. So with Parrish Cobb especially, it makes you wonder if he'd come into OU a little earlier, where would he be at? Because he certainly would be a bigger, more athletic corner than Dakota Austin, but you can trust Austin right now, whereas Cobb is just coming a little too late.
Looking at Austin's stat line, and you're right, Kerry, this is his stat line versus Iowa State. Intercepted pass breakup, 9 tackles, including first tackle for loss of his career. You go to the Kansas game. His first career start, he made 5 tackles, 2 pass breakups, and then he had a career high 11 tackles and an interception against Tech on October 24th last year. So he's shown up. He's got I guess the challenge is a lot bigger now going in as the guy, the starter, but he's definitely kind of answered that call every time that he's been asked of it.
You mentioned what Cook said about Cobb, and it was pretty interesting. I'll let you hear it, trying to pull it up in kind of an unconventional way.
Cobb, I've heard some buzz around him that he's really coming on. What can you tell me about
a little buzz?
Coming back.
The buzz is accurate, man. You know, Parrish has just got some tools that you just can't coach. Very athletic, very quick twitch, and unbelievably fast learner. You know, so he's really progressed. Missed a little bit early in camp because he had a quad, but now that thing's fully healed, he's really starting to show over these last 10 days, 12 days, you know, that he's very explosive, you know, very capable of learning the system.
So, yeah, I mean, you don't hear coaches rave about true freshmen like that very much. And Parnell Motley's another guy he's been raving about throughout camp, and he's a corner too. I think Motley's more of a guy they could play at safety if they wanted to, kind of like I'd say a little bit better cover version of like a Stephen Parker. You know, he's 6 foot tall. He's not rail thin, kind of like Dakota Austin is. But I mean, Parnell Motley and Parrish Cobb, 2 huge developments so far for them for the future in the secondary and camp.
The way they talk about Parnell Motley, correct me if I'm wrong, it kind of sounds a little bit like, is he a little bit like Will Johnson and what they like? Maybe probably a better cover corner than Will is, but is it kind of the same idea? Am I wrong on that?
I think he's not as big, but it's somewhere of a combination of Jordan Thomas, because they compare him to, because he has great length to Jordan Thomas, yet he has kind of some of that Will Johnson where he's a little bit of a playmaker. And I think there's a little bit of Stephen Parker there too.
And Motley was a great receiver in high school too, and a returner. He's a great athlete. So he's somebody. Cobb too. Cobb was another guy that was a returner. And Jordan Parker, who we haven't even talked about, who hasn't been on the field really, he was a guy who was a returner and played receiver for his high school. So these guys are all. I think this is clearly an uptick in athleticism and recruiting. This group, if you compare it to what Oklahoma had in the past and what's kind of coming in, there's no real specialist. We were talking about Motley and what he can do, but he can cover one-on-one. He can play in the nickel. He can be tough, and I think Cobb can do all those things too.
Well, yeah, and the other big subject going into the opener, and I don't think it's a big subject. I mean, just from what I've heard and seen and known and talked to, I feel like the offensive line is going to be pretty good. And compared to what they were going through a year ago, maybe we're overlooking it a little bit because it's like this sense of relief because you're not wondering if Derek Farniok can be the guy. I mean, Orlando Brown can play. Drew Samia can play. Now, can they be dominant? That's a whole other discussion. But it's obvious that they've settled on Cody Ford at left guard. The only question is Eric Wren the center and is Jonathan Alvarez the right guard, or is Jonathan Alvarez the center and then somebody else the right guard?
And then it's all like a trickle-down effect.
Right.
And I feel like it starts at center. And then I guess you have the small question of right tackle, and what's going on with Bobby Evans. It seemed like he was making headway there for a while, and then
he got banged up.
He got banged up last week, and he's kind of working through that. So, I just feel like at the outset of everything, they have better players than they had last year. They should be better, but is it going to kind of manifest over the first game? It's going to be tough. They're going against a good defensive line and with Houston.
I'm going to be honest. That interior offensive line last year, I know it was the experienced part of the unit. It was putrid. It was bad. That interior offensive line was not good. It got manhandled in a lot of games. The talent just wasn't there. The size wasn't there.
I would say the size wasn't there for Ty Darlington. That was their biggest problem a year ago.
And Neela got manhandled a lot too. I didn't,
and you saw why when he went to the combine and only lifted like 14 times.
Exactly. I mean Bennett, even if it's,
but he's in the NFL still. I mean,
but if it's Ben Powers and Cody Ford, that is a huge upgrade in strength compared to what they had a year ago. And I know Alvarez has gotten some praise that I don't know if I've seen it on the field yet. It wouldn't shock me at all if Eric Wren won that job and they feel comfortable with Alvarez as guard and they kick him over to right guard and then they just say, all right, we trust Samia at right tackle. We're going to trust Alvarez at right guard. They already are locked in with Evans at left guard, and they seem to really like Wren. I think that would be their most solidified lineup, even though they probably Bobby Evans at right tackle and Drew Samia at right guard gives you more athleticism and more upside. They probably feel more comfortable with that other lineup.
The two big things I feel like coming out of the offensive line this throughout camp has been, one, Eric Wren, two, Alex Dalton, and how big of a name he's kind of making for himself after battling through some injuries early. Is that accurate, you think, Kerry?
Yeah, and we still don't know what a healthy Daimler could do. I mean, he could come in, he could kick Drew Samia over to the guard spot if they felt like he was good enough. But he's been behind. He hasn't been in the boot for a while, so I think just physical, from a physical standpoint, I think he's probably in shape. Mm-hmm. He's capable of coming in, but he's not in football shape, as they always say. So
yeah, and that'll take.
And maybe ULM. You got to wait till ULM till you can really test drive that, because. And maybe you don't want to with Ohio. I mean, it really depends on this first game is huge to determine what they want to do moving forward. Say you play Houston, Dakota Austin struggles. Do you use ULM to get Parrish Cobb ready? If Dakota Austin plays really well, do you just leave it alone and continue, letting Parrish Cobb? You got to basically figure out from this Houston game, as long as you win it, where do you need to get better before you play Ohio State? And that'll be with Samia. Daimler, Wren, Alvarez. I think it'll be on the defensive line with Obo. Maybe you start looking at Capri Doucette against ULM if you don't feel like things are going good with Obo. There's a lot of. I don't worry about anybody in the secondary other than that corner spot, but you don't worry about running backs, receivers. I mean, that's one that's really going to be a influx thing because nobody other than Dede Westbrook has really stood out.
It's really interesting hearing Bob Stoops talk about the receivers on Wednesday, just in that I don't think they're looking at one guy. I'd never heard Bob talk about 10 guys getting a reception in one game. I thought that was a little interesting, and I guess that's just more of an evolution of what Lincoln Riley wants to do more than anything.
Yeah, I mean, what is Lincoln Riley going to do on offense? Because if the reports are true that we're hearing that you're just going to see a lot of Samaje Perine and Joe Mixon on the field at the same time, Mark Andrews is going to be on the field a lot, and Dede Westbrook we know is going to be on the field a lot. That leaves one other skill position spot to be filled.
And I would think it would be A.D. Miller.
And A.D. Miller would make the most sense, especially if he's going to be split out wide. Now, I mean, obviously Lincoln
and
Riley.
Basically, you're trading D.D. Westbrook for Geno Lewis or
Smallwood,
Michael Jones every once in a while, Smallwood. So a lot of those guys on the outside, it's going to be feast or famine because that's going to be, like you said, unless you're taking Mark Andrews off the field, you got one outside receiver on the field.
Which I doubt happens a lot, taking Mark Andrews.
But you know what? It's not like they're great at outside receiver. I mean, nobody's stepped up
proven.
there. Jeffrey Mead hasn't stepped up. I think, I can't remember who I was talking to this week. I think it must have been Lincoln Riley, but he had mentioned Michael Jones was about the only guy that could be an inside-outside guy, the way that they play.
Yeah, and I mean, we talked to Nick Baskin, and he basically said he's purely an inside guy, so it would have to be Michael Jones, the guy that goes inside and outside. And I think somebody on the board asked an intriguing question of, with all the buzz he was getting, could Michael Jones surpass that Ryan Broyles his freshman year that he had in 08? And I just don't see the opportunities being there.
No, it's going to be a late start for him because he was hurt. And you realize Ryan Broyles, he was on that 08 team, but he was not the focal point. You still had Jermaine Gresham. You had Manny Johnson, Joaquin Iglesias. You just lost Malcolm Kelly. So, yeah, he was just a bit part in their passing game that year. A good one, but not the star he would become.
I don't think Jones has a better year than that, though. I think if I had to put my money on somebody, and I've been saying
don't
this for a
forget
while.
Jarvis Baxter. I mean, he's got to get some catches.
I mean, Jarvis Baxter. I mean, what are you going to do with all these guys? How many catches can they really have in the season? 20? I mean, all these guys can have 20 apiece throughout the entire year. And I would say A.D. Miller is the candidate who could have a 50 catch, 750 yard season out of that
could
group.
see Dede having like 60 to 70. I could see Mark Andrews having 40 to 50, and then it just kind of spreading. Somebody will have 20 to 30. That'll either be Jarvis or Geno or A.D. Miller.
Does that not scare you that it's going to be like the 2009 wide receiver core? Because it had Ryan Broyles and a bunch of guys that didn't step up. It had Brandon Caleb and Adron Tennell, and none of those guys stepped up. Is that a concern?
That's everywhere, though. I mean, look at all the big time receivers Texas has gotten. How many transferred out?
Yeah.
I mean, and that's about the best example I can think of because Texas, they've signed all guys that OU wanted over the years, and most of those guys transferred out or just flopped. Or, I mean, in OU, even when times were good, Jay Norvell was signing these great classes, but you could only count on a couple of guys a year really stepping out and becoming really good players.
It must just be the Baker effect because I just don't feel like it's that big of a position of who's going to be the guy that steps up. I think there's going to be a lot of guys that just do nice
How many
things.
great receivers does Texas Tech ever have?
Yeah.
I mean, before Jakeem Grant, you had Michael Crabtree. How many receivers?
Wes Welker.
But, I mean, he was pre-Crabtree.
I mean,
they have a great passing game, but they don't really have great receivers coming out of Lubbock.
I mean, if you really pressed me and say who's going to be a receiver that steps up this year, I might cop out and say Joe Mixon.
Yeah,
I think he's going to just I was thinking about it driving down here today. If I was in Vegas, I would figure out a way to put a couple dollars on Joe Mixon to at least be invited to New York City. That's the hot sports opinion of the day right there. I think he's going to have a monster year, and it's going to be really, really interesting to see. It's going to be another level of last year and all the things that came with Joe Mixon. I think it's going to be really interesting how it's all handled, how if he's made available to the media, and just everything.
I don't think there's any question. Everybody I think Barry Trammell wrote a column about it when Lincoln Riley said that Joe Mixon's going to be a team captain around there someday. I don't think there's any question that Lincoln Riley was basically trying to foreshadow the fact that Joe Mixon's getting ready to be a huge part of this offense. Yeah. And they're going to do a lot of different things with him. You're going to see him used in ways he hasn't been used before. And he's going to, at one point, if things go as planned, he's going to become known as I'm just going to say it, he's going to become known as a Christian McCaffrey type player.
It's going to be really interesting. I noticed, I was meaning to text you the other night when Bob Stoops sent out like a tweet. Good luck to all the high school kids out there. It was the first time I had seen the picture that they used was Joe Mixon. It was number 25.
Really?
And that was just the first time that I'd seen like a OU initiated thing with him as kind of the face, I guess.
And to your point, Eddie, about him being a receiver, I remember going to the Rivals camp in Kansas City and talking to one of our national guys, and he said that when he saw Joe Mixon out of Florida in high school at a camp, he said that he would have him as the number one receiver in the country if he could have, that he was that good and impressive at receiver. And then I'm looking at last year's numbers, and Joe Mixon had 5 games with at least 3 catches. Jarvis Baxter had 2. Joe Mixon had 2 games with over 70 yards receiving. He also had a 100-yard receiving game. Jarvis Baxter never had more than 51 yards receiving in a game. So I think that's a great point, Eddie, that Joe Mixon might be the guy in the passing game that we're not talking about that really steps up.
I'm all in. I mean, I don't know. It seems weird.
I'm becoming very uncomfortable in this podcast. We're getting way too smart. Not enough dumb stuff. But no, I
can bring it down.
We're in Joe Mixon. We're in dumb stuff territory, so we can veer pretty quickly if you want to.
That was Joe Duvall that said that.
At Joe _.
When you hit the @ signal on the message board, just type in J and it'll bring his name right up.
Ask and you shall receive.
Well, look, we're winding down on our podcast. We're running out of time. Being that this is the weekend, we're going to have a lot more stuff and a lot more breakdown. I don't want to waste it all here because, we have press conferences next week. It'll be game week. I think the one thing, guys, I want to talk about before we get out of here is just the start of the season. It's been since Wednesday since I've been down at the stadium, but I make it a point to drive by a certain way so I can see that southeast corner, how much brick is going up. Mm-hmm. It amazes me how quickly they're getting it done.
Every week.
And, to not be able to start the season was always the plan in Norman. But, man, I mean, you really need to win this first game if you're Oklahoma more than ever before because it's ULM in the second game. And, I ran across this audio of Bob Stoops talking about the stadium and the expansion and what it was going to be like. It just reminded me of kind of what's at stake. If OU would lose this first game, how it would take the air out of the balloon to open up this stadium. But here's some from Bob Stoops.
Since we're all here, do you want to give us an expansion opinion?
Or no, I'm sorry. I totally screwed that up. That was an expansion thing. I don't know what I did with that audio. Here we go. Here's, I think.
I can... It's just,
okay, here we go. Here's Bob Stoops. And I think this was back in the spring, but just him talking about what it's going to be like to open up in the stadium.
How curious are you about how this changes the game day environment, the loudness in the
stadium? Yeah, I got to think it's going to pump everybody up. I mean, it's
you got the overhangs and stuff?
Yeah, just the aesthetics of it all look great, and it's got to hold more noise in, you would think, more so than it used to, and so I think it's going to be fabulous for the fans, and I think it'll excite them as well.
Have you noticed that, when you've played in bold-in stadiums, that it's a little bit louder or different?
Not many places we go, it's not too loud. So, yeah. But I don't know. It's just hard to say.
Yeah, that was definitely the spring. That was former OU beat writer Jason Kersey, who now works covering Arkansas. But all this stuff that's going on, it just reminded me. And I was kind of looking over some audio yesterday and earlier today, how far this program has come. We talked about, that 8-5 season. I was even listening back to audio of them in the Sugar Bowl. But, you come off that Sugar Bowl year, all the expectations are there. Then you go 8-5, and it was almost like the world came to an end. And then they put that season back together. But remember back to this time, when no one on the coaching staff could even pronounce one of the best players in college football's name on signing day?
We haven't even talked about Samaje Perine.
Joe Mixon, Samaje Perine. Samaje Perine was
Joe Mixon, Samaje Perine.
I mean, how long a time, how far away are we now from where this program was 2 years ago? It's just unbelievable.
Far enough to think that I think you were the one that asked the question on Monday of this week. A year ago at this point, they hadn't even named Baker Mayfield the starting quarterback, let alone everything else that came with it. And, it is going to be interesting just to see I guess, how everything develops over the next couple months, where Oklahoma ends up. But you're right. The Houston game is so important, and there's so many. I guess just the way that I've looked at it, and I've had this in the way that my mind has worked, that there's so many comparisons to 2009, to the BYU game. And I was thinking about this driving down here, and think about how much everything changed in that last week, even going into that 2009 game. I remember texting you, Carrie. This was before I was working, texting you from Renfield's in Uptown about Jermaine Gresham the night before the game. I mean, that's just there's so much that can change, I guess, in the matter of a week, is what I was thinking. And it's just crazy to think that it's all here in front of us now.
Yeah, I mean, who is it? John Smoltz hurt himself sneezing once. I mean, if Baker Mayfield does that, I mean, the season's over for Oklahoma. I mean, if you hear in the next couple of weeks that Baker Mayfield did something and rolled his ankle and he can't play, that could be curtains for Oklahoma. And that 2009 season, I can't remember having that high of expectations just fizzle so quickly. And I mean, the potential is there for this year.
And let's face it, the Sooners came back in 2011, were ranked number 1 going into the preseason that year.
Yeah.
But it never really got any better until last year for this OU program.
That at Missouri #1 game, I think, was the last kind of moment with Landry Jones when Oklahoma lost. That was it until this Baker Mayfield resurgent year.
I don't know if maybe it was just the fans that really bought into it. I don't know if I did, but I just never really thought that 2011 team was a team that could actually win a national title, was a #1 team or anything like that. This year, it might be a little bit different. I feel like I think it is probably, again, the Baker effect, in that, I don't know. I don't know. I feel like there is no ceiling for this team just because of the things that Baker was able to do. And I think it's going to be interesting going down to Houston to see how they respond to kind of the bullseye on their back now. It's the first time that they've really been the hunted rather than the hunter that they were, I guess, the last couple years, or the last couple games of last season.
I think it all comes down to how physical they are in the offensive and defensive line. Because, I mean, Clemson has the quarterback. They've got the skill players. They've got, I don't know if they have the secondary this year or not, but that's what proved last year is OU wasn't on an elite level on the. We knew they weren't on the offensive line. Without Charles Walker, they weren't on the defensive line. So if they can get better there, they can be there, probably playing Clemson for a national championship at the end of the year. But to think everything that's on the line in this first game, Sooner Squad 17, brand new stadium, how far Bob's come. I mean, the firings of Josh Heupel and letting go, retiring of Bobby Jack Wright and the Jerry Montgomery drama. I mean, all the stuff this program's been through the last couple of years. To think how much rests on this game against Houston, I'd say, it probably is one of the top 5. I'd definitely say it's top. It might be one of the top 2 or 3 season openers that Bob Stoops has ever had.
How do you become more physical over a summer? That was a good thread on the board, I thought. You talked a little bit to Matt Diamond about it, and just, is it a mentality thing? Can they do things at practice to make them more physical? I don't know. I think it's a big question mark.
You look at Clemson; they had tons of depth.
Yeah,
I mean, when they lost Shaq Lawson, they brought in other guys that were really good, and they're going to need. I think on the defensive line, that's the biggest thing we've learned about camp is you don't just have Romar and Wade and Walker, but now you have Gallimore. You got Q Overton. You have DJ Ward coming along. You have Austin Roberts coming along. You got Amani Bledsoe that you can. I mean, they didn't have this depth a year ago.
Yeah,
it's recruiting. I mean, you can't convince me that Brent Venables, as defensive coordinator at Clemson, is out there running much more physical practices than Mike Stoops is. I mean, Brent Venables was defensive coordinator here in Norman, and it doesn't matter what kind of practices you run if you don't have the Jimmies and the Joes up front. I always kind of adhere to that Switzer mentality of, if you want to get stronger, you want to get faster, you go recruit better players. And Oklahoma is starting to do that. So, I mean, I don't know if you'll see that depth immediately this year. I think if Oklahoma went up against Clemson again, you would notice it still. But they're working that way. They're working to where that once they get into those elite games against Clemson's and Alabamas, they can hang. And I don't think there's any games before the playoff that they won't be favored. I think Oklahoma will be by far the favorite team outside of that Ohio State game.
I think Vegas plays that out right now, yeah.
Yeah, so they'll be the best team in the Big 12 on paper, and I think they'll get to the college football playoff, and they'll be just a little outmanned at the trenches again if that's were to happen.
All right, I think this was probably our most nuts and bolts team podcast that we've ever had. Some things we left on the table that we'll get to eventually. Would love to talk about TCU naming Kenny Hill their starting quarterback, what that's going to mean. OU plays them early in the season. But for Josh McCuistion, I want to let you guys go ahead and get out to your games that you got to get to tonight. For Eddie Radosevich and Joe Duvall in studio. Appreciate everybody listening. Go make sure you subscribe on iTunes. You can also check us out on SoundCloud. But thank you to everyone out there. We're becoming one of the top podcasts on iTunes in the college and high school category. So thank you for being a part of the podcast. Thanks for listening. And we'll see you guys next time here on the Unofficial 40.